Mr. Beer.
Yes, thank you, sir. Good morning, Mr. Reid.
Good morning.
Can I ask to begin one set of questions arising from something that you said in the course of your evidence yesterday? I think you'll recall that the inquiry, the chairman held compensation hearings, i.e. hearings into the schemes that were set up to provide redress to sub-postmasters. And he held 4 such hearings, one on the 6th of July, one on the 13th of July 2022, and then one on the 8th of December 2022, and then one on the 27th of April 2023, which I suspect you'll remember particularly because you attended it. You sat alongside, I think, Ms. Gallifant-Casey with Mr. Staunton, the then chairman of the Post Office, sitting behind you. And so in none of those 4 hearings was it said by the Post Office that it was the Post Office's belief that the Post Office, should not be administering the schemes of redress or any of them. Do you agree?
I can't recall the specifics of that. It may be the case.
And nor was it said that the inquiry should make recommendations accordingly, whether in its progress updates, in its interim reports, saying that the Post Office should not be administering any of these schemes. Instead, the Post Office's position, and I summarise greatly, was that it was properly administering the schemes for which it had responsibility, and that sufficient elements of independence were either already built into the schemes or could be built into them. Do you agree?
That's what I said yesterday, yes, indeed.
You said yesterday that you looked at some contemporaneous notes of a conversation that you had with the government, Post Office's shareholder. And you say the way it was portrayed to me was that the Treasury were of the opinion that the chaos, I think was the word that was used, that had been caused by the Post Office, there was a desire for the Post Office to experience some of the discomfort that had been caused, i.e. it should have involvement in and be involved in the administration of the schemes. And you went on to say that by contrast, it was your firmly held view that for a range of reasons, the Post Office should have nothing to do with the provision of redress to wrong sub-postmasters, certainly in terms of financial compensation. Was that a personal view that you held?
It is a personal view that I hold, but I think it's also a view that's held by others within the Post Office. Certainly, just to confirm your earlier comments, we have done everything that we can to build independence into the schemes, but I think the start point of this, and it will be Simon Recaldin's view, I'm sure, when you speak to him next week as well, that there was always going to be difficulty with the Post Office administering compensation because of the level of trust and confidence that many of the victims will have in the Post Office. So I don't think it's a particularly controversial position.
Was it the corporate view, essentially, of the Post Office?
Yes, it was, and has been for some time.
If that was the corporate view of the Post Office, why was it not communicated to the inquiry in any of those 4 hearings? I.e., we do not want anything to do with redress schemes. We think it is difficult for us to be involved for the reasons that you give. Please make recommendations to take this business away from us.
It's a good question. I'm not sure specifically why we didn't say that. It is a conversation that has been ongoing with government for some time. That's our failure to do so.
The inquiry was considering those very things. There were sub-postmaster groups who were saying, take the function away from, or do not give the function to the Post Office. And the chairman was considering making recommendations about those very things. Again, I ask, if that was the corporate view of the Post Office, why did it not communicate it?
It's a good question. I'm unsure why we didn't make that very explicit. Clearly, we should have done.
Or is it a view that you've now come to in the light of the events which have happened?
No, it's a view that I've held for some time, and it's a view within the organisation that has been held for some time.
Well, I think that I'd like a kind of straight answer to the question. Was it a view held by the organisation at the dates of each of those compensation hearings?
It's been a view held by the organisation since the very start.
Right.
Of the
So it
scheme.
was then?
So yes.
Can I continue then, Mr. Reid, with the topic that we were addressing yesterday afternoon, the investigation of postmasters and the engagement of the Post Office with law enforcement agencies?
Yes.
Can we look, please, at poll 0044 8310? These are the minutes of the SEG, the Strategic Executive Group, which you mentioned and explained to us yesterday, held relatively recently, the 26th of June 2024. And you're shown, amongst others, as present, along with Mr. Brocklesby, Mr. Woodley, Nicola Marriott, Karen McEwen, Sarah Gray. And do you recall that in this meeting, the SEG had to consider, because it was tabled before it, a paper concerning the passage of material to law enforcement agencies?
I don't specifically. Do you have it in?
Yes. I mean, let's look at the paper that was tabled before
Yep.
this SEG, and it might help you. Poll 0044 8345. You can see that it's a SEG report. The meeting date is the 26th of June 2024. The author was Mr. Bartlett, Director of AC&I. The sponsor was Miss Gray, Interim Group General Counsel. If we look at the executive, we should look at for the input sought. SEG approval is sought regarding the proposed change in process governing the passing of information to law enforcement to assist them in criminal investigations and any subsequent prosecutions prior to this matter being discussed at the board in July 2024. So it's seeking, is this right, the SEG, that group's approval to pass a policy for approval to the full Post Office Board?
That's what it's
Yes.
suggesting, yes.
Executive summary, the current group investigations policy, cooperation with law enforcement policy, the CLEP, and legal playbook, the old policies, are considered too unwieldy and unnecessarily complex, as well as being drafted before the existence of AC&I. The CLEP has resulted in slower than needed provision of information to law enforcement and the necessary involvement of the board in the authorisation process. The old policies have been consolidated into a new draft investigation and cooperation with law enforcement policy, the new policy. The draft new policy, amongst other investigative operational changes, proposes a streamlining of the governance of providing law enforcement with information. The director of AC&I and the in-house criminal counsel would have to agree to providing the information, and depending on the age of the information, a caveat would also be provided. Then report. Paragraph 2. How the investigations policy was implemented in respect of possible criminal matters relied upon its interaction with the CLEP and legal playbook. These were focused on limiting, in a high-risk perception environment, how Post Office reported matters to and shared data with law enforcement. Uniquely, sharing data in a witness statement or as an exhibit required the extraordinary permission of the board. So that's talking about the past, isn't
Yes.
it? And is that right, that in order for Horizon data in a witness statement or Horizon data in an exhibit to be passed to a law enforcement agency, that required the permission of the full Post Office board?
That's correct.
That was the position. Okay. 3, the old policies are not enabling Post Office to act in an agile way in moving forward with reporting instances to law enforcement where the Post Office suspects they may have been a victim of crime or promptly servicing lawful requests for information to aid a police investigation. AC&I recently took responsibility for being the only conduit for witness statements to be provided to the police, including relieving the security team of this activity. Then over the page. This has given us the first pan-Post Office picture of the scale of these requests and what is required to service them objectively and in an evidence-based way. There are currently 22 police forces requesting or awaiting Horizon-based evidence across 33 police investigations. To provide this information, AC&I will need to draw on Horizon data and often provide transaction analysis. The current approach is that the board will need to be approached in the majority of these cases as and when the data is able to be shared. A draft policy is attached for the proposed replacement for the old policies to reflect the enhanced capabilities of the AC&I and the improved governance approach to investigations generally. In particular, the draft proposes a change in the governance of passing material to law enforcement, which we believe is risk balanced. And then an extract from the draft is set out. Paragraph 1 within paragraph 9, proactively and reactively supplied information will have differing profiles due to historic technology issues. The version of Horizon that was considered at fault in the Horizon IT scandal was replaced in October 2019. In 2020, known errors and bugs identified in the Horizon issues judgment form part of review by KPMG of the system and found not to be prevalent in the system. From 2021, a new collaborative approach was taken to resolving reported Horizon issues in a dispute resolution process. Due to the effect of these developments, the following approach to data sharing with law enforcement agencies is, and then skipping any information originating from Horizon after the 1st of January may be passed as either intelligence or evidence only after AC&I, I think that's the director of AC&I, is that right?
That's correct.
Or their nominated deputy and an in-house counsel both give approval, and a record of the decision must be recorded. Where information is requested by LEAs that's Horizon data originating from pre the 1st of January 2022, the same process must be followed. In addition, the wording included in the relevant section of the investigator's manual covering the passing of information to LEAs must be included in any witness statement for evidence or in an accompanying email or letter to the LEA requesting the the information in a non-evidential format. And then if we carry on, if we scroll down, please. And then back to the paper itself, paragraph 6, the accompanying lines referenced above, which caveat the material passed to law enforcement, is also in draft and is. So this seems to be some wording that it was proposed would caveat certain disclosures. Quote, from December the 31st, 2019, all post offices have worked on a version of Horizon that the High Court case of Bates and others has been considered by the High Court to be relatively robust. I think there's some extra words or words missing from that sentence, but anyway. In 2020, Horizon was tested for the known errors and bugs identified in the Horizon Issues judgment and found not to be prevalent. During 2021, a process was developed to work collegiately with postmasters to understand the causes of any shortfalls. Any Horizon data that predates January 2022 cannot be shown to have benefited from all three of these checks and balances. And then the SEG paper continues. There are significant differences between the environment that existed at the time of the old policies were formed and the current and future environment. The current approach to dispute resolution and the underlying technology could be seen as supporting a more business as usual approach to passing information to law enforcement. However, the most significant difference between 2019, when the old policies were first drafted, and now is that ACNI exists and brings significant criminal investigation experience to bear, but more importantly, also considerably more objective rigour to assessing evidence. Project Panther within ACNI is solely focused on testing the reliability of data that post office investigators and law enforcement will rely on. And then paragraph 9, SEG is asked to discuss the proposed change of approach in advance of a proposal being presented at the board in July. So just stepping back, so the context is made clear by this paper, isn't it, that there were a large number of forces, some 22,
Yes.
Requesting evidence or requesting data in quite a large number of cases, 33 cases. And to summarise what we've just read there, would you agree the proposed new approach had two elements to it? Firstly, there would be no more need for board approval for sharing a witness statement about Horizon or sharing Horizon data. Instead, approval would come from the director of ACNI plus an in-house counsel. Secondly, when a witness statement or data was shared, if it related to pre-January 22 data, it would be caveated in the way that we saw.
Yes.
That form of words would be applied to it. Can we go back to the SEG minutes, please? Poll 0044 8310. So this is the meeting at which this paper was presented. And if we go forwards to page 7, please. And scroll down to paragraph 4.6. Under the heading Disclosure to Support Police Investigations, presented by Ms Gray and Mr Bartlett. Tabled and noted was the paper on disclosure to support police investigations, passing of material to law enforcement. SEG declined to approve the submission of the paper on disclosure support for police investigations to the board, noting further work and assurance was required in relation to Horizon data assurance. So questions arising from these two documents. Looking at the position as it stood before the SEG paper, why was the board's permission required to share Horizon data with law enforcement agencies in a witness statement or as an exhibit?
I think we touched on this yesterday, and the view of the board was that they wanted to have visibility for any kind of data that was being provided to law enforcement agencies, and that they wanted sight of the sort of scale of the requests and indeed how that was being operated. And I think we described yesterday that there was that effective trade-off between requests from LEAs and the requirement to conform to those requests, whilst at the same time visibility, quite rightly from the board, that they wanted to understand where we were engaging with law enforcement agencies, what type of issue was being displayed, and to continue with that. And I think that is why the SEG declined to approve the submission of the paper. I think there was some surprise, my recollection from the meeting, where there was some surprise at the scale of requests in terms of the 22 law enforcement agencies and the 33 requests. I think that came as a surprise to colleagues. I think we were of the opinion that it was in the ones and twos in terms of requests for information on this sort of scale, and I think that was the primary discomfort, was the size and the number of requests that were coming forward, and therefore a better understanding of and a bigger understanding of the picture was requested.
Well, in fact, and we'll come to this in a moment, is what the minutes note is that further work and assurance was required in relation to Horizon data assurance, not to know more about the number or nature of the requests. It's about assuring, presumably, the quality, accuracy and integrity of Horizon data that this is referring to.
That too, certainly. But I think it was more a case of understanding the bigger picture. I think there wasn't that level of understanding at the SEG, and I think we needed to understand more broadly, what was being requested, in what form, and how we were going to supply that information, and what reassurance that we had that we were doing this in an appropriate way. So yes, I think there were certainly questions over data assurance, but I think it was a broader assurance that that the SEG were also looking for.
You said, and one can understand why the board might want to understand the scale of Horizon disclosure for law enforcement purposes and to have visibility. That is satisfied by the provision of information to the board. What this describes is that the board had to give its permission in order for a disclosure to occur. How did the board, in fact, go about determining whether to give permission for disclosure or not?
I don't recall having specific cases come to the board for that particular, to respond to that particular issue. I think this is still fairly uncharted territory for the organisation in its sort of modern guise in terms of how we supply information to LEAs. So I don't think we'd had a breakdown, certainly at the board, not in my time, of a specific case and then got under the skin of how and what we are supplying and in what context. So I think this is the start of that journey, for want of a better word, in the sense that this is the ACNI coming forward with a proposal.
I'm sorry, Mr. Reid, I don't want to make it sound as if Mr. Beer and I are Starsky and Hutch, but I just don't follow that, because all those requests for information from the police, the 33 of them, the vast majority of them presumably couldn't have occurred without the board already having sanctioned a report to the police.
Well, I guess the way that I understand it is that the police have obviously requested information. There will be a reason why they
Yeah,
do that.
but what I mean is, once the board are asked to sanction a report to the police, they obviously know that there is a case which is now being investigated by the police.
Yes.
The way that the paper put it was that there are currently 22 police forces requesting or awaiting Horizon-based evidence across 33 police investigations. The current approach is that the board will need to be approached in the majority of these matters. when the data is able to be shared, as and when the data is
Yes.
able to be shared. Was the organisation simply not processing these requests?
Yeah, I think that's
essentially sort of paralysed.
I think that's the point that's being made.
Do you know whether the Post Office had disclosed what Mr. Cameron had summarised at that meeting that we looked at yesterday? Do you remember the January 2023 meeting, the quarterly meeting with UKGI and DBT, where he said that the Horizon data is not sufficient to do an investigation in many cases? Do you know whether that kind of disclosure had been made to the police service?
I'm not sure.
Do you know whether ACNI had in fact provided, before June 2024, Horizon data and transaction analysis to the police?
I don't recall a specific case of that coming to the SEG or to the board. No.
How was, in the 33 cases, the Post Office ensuring that the Horizon data that it proposed to provide to the police service was sufficient and that the transaction analysis that went with it was sound?
I don't have, as I say, this is work that's in train. I don't have the specific detail of that.
The proposal that Mr. Bartlett and Miss Gray made by way of their SEG report was to essentially devolve responsibility for permission to in-house counsel and to Mr. Bartlett. And one of the reasons given was that the ACNI bring, quote, considerably more objective rigour to assessing evidence. How do ACNI bring considerably more objective rigour to assessing evidence?
I think the majority of the individuals who work within the ACNI, which I think, as we discussed yesterday, is a relatively new organisation. Within that team, there are primarily individuals who've worked in law enforcement outside of the Post Office. And I think the assumption is therefore being made that these are individuals who have the right training and the right experience of law enforcement more specifically than perhaps was the case in the past. And I think what is being demonstrated here is a transition from the old security teams that operated within the Post Office historically, which were made up of a variety of different individuals, and the more professional approach that's now being adopted by ACNI with better training, better skills, and better experience associated with law enforcement.
More specifically, you mentioned better training procedures and personnel. More specifically, do you know how ACNI was testing the reliability of Horizon data that the Post Office and then subsequently law enforcement agencies would rely on in a prosecution?
No, I haven't seen how the testing process works.
Do you know what data, which data ACNI was testing?
No, I don't have access to that.
Did you agree with the SEG's decision to decline to approve the submission of the Bartlett paper to the board?
I believe so, yes. It's, I think we found the step and the move pretty significant as a group, and we discussed it obviously as a group.
Why did you find the step significant?
I think, as I mentioned a little earlier, I was surprised at the number of law enforcement agencies that were engaging with us and the scale of the interest, the 22 and the 33.
So it was the number of cases in which disclosure would or could occur that caused pause for thought?
It caused pause for thought primarily because the team in ACNI is stretched, massively stretched, as we mentioned yesterday, both in terms of its response to the variety of work, both internal investigations of senior colleagues, the assurance work they're providing on loss recovery and discrepancies, as well as the engagement with law enforcement agencies, and in addition to that, the work they're doing on Speak Up. So I think the team was very stretched. This felt like considerably large amounts of work, and I think we wanted to make sure that it was being thoroughly administered.
Did anyone within the SEG disagree with the SEG decision, i.e. they wanted to approve the submission of the paper to the board?
I don't recall the specifics, but I don't think so.
I mean, presumably Mr. Bartlett
Yes, clearly.
and Ms. Gray, because they had sponsored and written it and proposed it.
Correct, but they're not obviously members of the SEG.
The minutes of the SEG recorded that further work and assurance was required in relation to Horizon data assurance. Can you help, firstly, with what that means?
I think the methodology, I'm slightly speculating, but I think it's the methodology associated with how we are testing Horizon data and how we are assuring ourselves both from an IT, with the IT function, but also with colleagues at Fujitsu, that we have a methodology that is robust.
I mean, one reading of the note, the minutes, is that we've got to satisfy ourselves in-house as to the quality and reliability of our Horizon data before we think about passing it to law enforcement agencies and before we downgrade from the board to two other individuals the permission to do so.
Yes,
Would that be a fair summary?
That would be a fair summary.
Okay. Has the further work and assurance in relation to Horizon data assurance been undertaken to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge. I'm unaware as to what progress has been made over July, August and September.
Do you know who was it was proposed should undertake that Horizon data assurance?
No, I haven't got that detail.
I mean, we've seen, for example, in Mr. Patterson's letters, some things said by Fujitsu that would be disclosable, or at least potentially disclosable, in criminal proceedings. Certainly, as a defence lawyer, I would want to see them.
Right.
Was that brought into account in any of this process, i.e. what was going on at the higher level between Post Office and Fujitsu, and in the course of such correspondence, what Fujitsu felt unable to say in its correspondence as to Horizon reliability?
I think that was part of the debate that was had in June, certainly, and I think we're all acutely aware of the interactions that we've had with Fujitsu, and clearly that's something that we discussed as part of this process.
Thank you. Can we turn to what sub-postmasters are told about who investigates them? And go to the sub-postmaster contract, please. Poll 400254. Just so that you know, this is the post-Horizon issues judgment contract. We'll come back to it later today or perhaps tomorrow for some other features of the contract. Can we look at it in relation to what postmasters are told about investigations of them now, however, by looking at pages 71 and 72? This is section 19 of the new sub-postmaster contract. and it concerns, in broad terms, offences committed by sub-postmasters, their suspension and inquiries by officers of the investigation division. You can see that that's the heading underneath section
Yes.
19. You can just scan, if we go down slowly, so you can see the context of what is going to be said on page 72. Arrest and conviction, immorality, suspension. Then we scroll on, please. Criminal conduct reporting, inducement to act contrary to the rules. And then over the page. Thefts by strangers, failures to report dishonesty. And then the cross-heading, inquiries by officers of the Post Office Investigation Division, POID, as it used to be known for many, many years. And it says, as sub-postmasters are told, the main job of the investigation division is to investigate or help the police to investigate criminal offences against the post office and others. The investigation division does not inquire into matters where crime is not suspected. Most of the crimes dealt with by the investigation division are committed by outsiders. It follows a common reason for investigation division officers seeking interviews with persons employed is to get help in clearing up such offences. And then this, paragraph 14. Although they comprise the minority of all investigation division crime investigations, there are many cases where the possibility or even direct suspicion arises that persons employed by a post office business may be involved. Officers of the investigation division conduct interviews about these suspected offences, and they're required to observe the same code of conduct when obtaining evidence as that laid down for police officers. This provides for an officer investigating a criminal offence to question any person, whether suspected or not, from whom he thinks that useful information may be obtained. As soon as the investigation division officer has evidence which would afford reasonable grounds for suspecting a person has committed an offence, he must caution him before asking any questions about that offence. The caution must be in terms which make it clear the suspected person is not obliged to say anything unless he wishes to do so, etc. And then 15, if a sub-postmaster or post office branch assistant is questioned as a suspected person by an officer of the investigation division on statements made by a third person and expresses a desire to be confronted by that person, such confrontation will, if practicable, be arranged. At the confrontation, the suspect will be at liberty to question the third person on his evidence, and the questions and replies will be recorded by the investigation division officer. So this describes those conducting the investigation as the Post Office Investigation Division and officers of the investigation division. Given the history of the scandal dealt with in the judgments of Mr. Justice Fraser and the Court of Appeal Criminal Division, and indeed perhaps the inquiry, is it appropriate that Post Office maintains within the contract the existence of the Post Office Investigation Division?
I must say, I think the wording is heavy-handed in terms of the way it's described, and I don't think it reflects the way that we conduct investigations. So I think there is a misalignment, and the expression investigation division is not consistent with ACNI. So I would agree with you on that.
And again, given the history, is it appropriate that the sub-postmasters are told that the investigation division retains investigative powers that include an evidential interview process under caution?
No, I don't think it is.
So at least this section of the contract requires some quite radical revision, properly to describe the system for reporting and investigation of possible offences by Post Office to the police, doesn't it?
I would agree.
Do you know why sub-postmasters are told this? Admittedly, on the basis of the inquiry survey, only 15% have got the new contract. But,
Yes.
Why sub-postmasters are told this sort of 5 years on after the judgments of the High Court?
I would agree with you that it's not consistent with the way that the ACNI team operate. It's not consistent with the way that we conduct investigations in practice, and it's not consistent with the way that we support postmasters when they have issues. So I think there is a misalignment. I would agree with you, Mr. Bear.
And from a postmaster reading the contract, nothing has changed, has it?
This would not, as you say, the language and the way that it's constructed is not helpful and not reflective of the way the Post Office is operating today.
And so that raises the why question.
Yes,
why is it still like this?
No, and I think that's an entirely reasonable question. There is, we've obviously done some work on contract restatement. We've obviously done some work on addressing the issues that have emerged from the CIJ and the HIJ, and made sure that the core tenets of that particular judgment, particularly the duty of good faith, and particularly the presumption of innocence, and particularly the addressing issues around secrecy and lack of transparency, I think it would be entirely reasonable to conclude that this section of the contract needs rewording, and it needs addressing, not just rewording, but it needs addressing. We're clear that we have work to do on contracts in terms of the specifics, and I would say that back in 2019, once we had the judgments handed down, the most important element for me at that stage was to make sure that we changed the behaviours within the organisation, and then we changed the contract. So, which is why we did a restatement rather than a recontracting completely across the organisation. That is still outstanding, and that is work that needs to be done.
Can I turn to the turn back in part to Project Phoenix and the Past Roles project for something that has been said in the course of the undertaking of those two pieces of work, and just by way of some fuller context than was given yesterday, can we look please at your third witness statement from paragraph 230 onwards? That's page 108. I'm just going to read in some of the paragraphs of your witness statement by way of context for Project Phoenix and the Past Roles project. You say in 230, the background to both Project Phoenix and Past Roles is that in 2022 I raised the issue with Simon Recalding, stating it was a concern to me and potentially very problematic that there may still be colleagues in post who either needed to be investigated themselves or be moved into different roles to ensure confidence is maintained amongst both victims of the scandal and serving postmasters. Some colleagues may have been aware of wrongdoing, or indeed, without there being immediate proof of it, have contributed to the wrongdoing. I initiated a piece of work in the organisation to try to get a grip on what the scale of this challenge was, and the number of colleagues still working in Post Office and to whom this might apply would then need to determine what action to take. The progress was slow and painstaking, and to be fair, this was not an easy task. We needed to be clear who was doing what roles and when in the past. We had incomplete HR records, which, given this was a desktop exercise to review 1,700 colleagues with over 10 years' history in the organisation, was a significant challenge. We needed to be clear whether not only should they be being investigated themselves, but also whether, even if no evidence of wrongdoing, there were colleagues now involved in activities like disclosure or administering the compensation schemes where it would be more sensitive for them to be moved. Anything where it would be better that there was no postmaster interface. I did not want to cut across rebuilding confidence. And then 233, in terms of Project Phoenix, my own view, one which I believe I share with others, is that for individuals who are actually close to the investigations unit prior to 2015, it's hard to conceive that they were unaware of wrongdoing at that time. I'm aware that there are approximately 40 cases that were looked into further following evidence which emerged at the restorative justice meetings, the human impact hearings, and from evidence before the inquiry. These are case studies, not numbers of individuals, i.e. the same individual could have been involved in a number of cases. As far as I'm aware, there are now only a handful of individuals who worked in the investigations unit, which was disbanded in 2015, who are still employed by Post Office. They do remain in the organisation, but in different roles. Mr. Bartlett provided further information. I am confident, therefore, that no one from that era remains in the investigations or audit sections of the business. And then 234, I recognise and understand on a personal level, share the frustration that Post Office has not been able to move quicker and go further in respect of Project Phoenix and on past roles. I would have preferred Post Office to take more decisive action and said as much at board discussions. That is not where the organisation is, however, and the collective decision was made at board, not simply to dismiss anyone who was, for instance, an investigator at the time, but against whom there was no direct evidence of wrongdoing, rather to transfer them to other departments, offer voluntary redundancy where possible, but where appropriate, to thoroughly investigate. The board was and is collectively concerned about a myriad of other considerations, including, importantly, I should say, Post Office not acting in a disrespectful way that might resonate with behaviours in the past. And lastly, 235, Post Office understands that unless wrongdoing can formally and fairly be established, it cannot simply remove existing staff because they were in post when the miscarriages of justice were taking place. Those individuals, of course, have employment and indeed human rights themselves. This is, however, a deeply difficult area and one which I'm aware the Postmaster NEDs feel very strongly about. This is also relevant to something you say below. Can we look, please, with that background, to the terms of reference for the Past Roles project, POL 0044 8308. This records, by way of context, that after this inquiry's compensation hearing in December 2022, it became apparent that Post Office had recruited into its remediation unit, the RU team, employees who had previously worked for Post Office in the auditing, investigation, suspension or termination of postmasters connected to historic Horizon shortfall cases. This risked undermining the integrity of, or the public or postmaster confidence in, the work being undertaken or done by the remediation unit. It also put employees at risk. And then the aim, thank you, the aim of the project is to, and I'm only going to read one, review the past roles conducted by colleagues currently employed within the unit and inquiry teams to identify any that could be, for want of a better word, potentially problematic. Examples of such roles might include roles in the auditing, investigation, suspension or termination of postmasters connected to historic Horizon shortfall cases. They might be problematic because they pose a risk to the integrity or independence of work being done now, public or postmaster confidence in that work. they create conflict, or they place our employees at risk. So is essentially this the result or product of the idea which you were the genesis of?
That's correct.
And what was your principal concern? What was it at the December 22 compensation hearing
Well, I think
that lit the fire?
yes. I think there were a couple of triggers. I think the first trigger was the re-employment of individuals who had been in the business prior to 2015. I can't specifically recall if that was something that was raised at the compensation hearing, but it was about that time, which was the first trigger for me of concern, is that we were rehiring individuals who had been in the business prior to 2015 in that work. And I think the second element was that on exploring that with Simon Rakaldin and then subsequently with Jane Davis, it became an issue for me and I think it was crystallized during the compensation hearings, that this might be something that is problematic. And Simon advised that there were individuals within the remediation unit who may well have been involved historically in auditing investigation or activities that were of relevance to this inquiry. That was a surprise to me in terms of how we had determined and decided to staff the RU, and that was something that, for a myriad of reasons, most of which are contained in the terms of reference here and in the aims of the project, felt problematic for me.
So can we wind forwards then to see what had occurred and the approach that was being taken once the project was up and running, by looking at a group executive report, which you, I think, sponsored, of the 17th of January 2024, poll 00448615. And so I don't think you wrote this yourself.
No, and the sponsorship, this would have been, Patrick Quinn works for Karen McEwen, so I think there is some confusion as to why the sponsorship would be me particularly, but as it's not a function that works for me.
Right. So you didn't sponsor this report?
No. This report will have come to the group executive, but it won't have been something specifically sponsored by me.
And so did you have any role in its creation?
No, not in its creation. This report would have come to the group executive, and I would have been appraised of it and had an opportunity to pre-read it before the meeting.
So you would have been a recipient rather than the sender?
That's correct.
So that's just wrong?
Yes.
Okay. Might it be because you have told us that you led on the idea, you thought of the problem, and you created the work
possibly
that led to the creation of the terms of reference?
Possibly. There is a broader question around the concept of sponsor and line manager that I think is still to be addressed as part of the way that we create reports within the Post Office. The notion of sponsorship and line management gets confused and blurred, and I think, candidly, it's obviously having my name in the sponsors box.
I just want to ask you about something that's written as the communications theme for the project, and it's on page 11 of this document, which is an appendix to it, and you can see that it says key themes for comms, and if you just go to the foot of the page, you can see that what that means by way of footnote a little bit further. These are themes for internal communications. Okay? these are themes are internal communications. So if we just go up, please. It speaks in paragraph 1 as a key theme being that the documentary or the docudrama had generated a lot of focus, including that Post Office continues to employ individuals who were to some extent involved in historic suspension, investigation and prosecution. And then in paragraph 3, having described in 2 the work that was ongoing, the key theme is said to be, in carrying out this work, we're acutely aware of the duties we owe to our colleagues and the views of our trade unions. That seems fair enough.
Yes.
We also recognise that in the vast majority of cases, employees who performed such roles in the past will have carried out their duties according to instructions given to them by the business at the time and in the belief that Horizon was robust. Do you know the basis for that key theme for communication?
What do you mean by the basis for it?
An assessment that in the vast majority of cases, employees within this cohort carried out their duties according to instructions given to them by the business, and that they did so in the belief that Horizon was robust.
As in, is the author of this document in a position to make that statement? Is that what you're inferring?
Yes.
Yes, it doesn't look precise from my perspective. I don't know where the author would be able to make that, or make that assumption, perhaps.
Was this is this a reflection of a belief within the general executive at the time that although we're undertaking this past roles project, in fact, the majority of the people caught by it will have been doing their job according to instructions and in a belief that Horizon was robust? I.e., we can tell our people, although we've got to do this, we know, in fact, that they were just doing their jobs.
I don't think there was any particular determination of that view. I think one of the sort of themes that has emerged amongst colleagues still working within the organisation is that many of the leaders of the organisation historically who have appeared before this inquiry appear not to have been held to account if indeed they were aware of and understood other issues associated with Horizon in the past. And I think there was very definitely a view amongst the people community and the authors of this note that people were going about doing their job and we needed to be sensitive to the fact that people were going about doing their job to the best of their ability with what they knew, as opposed to a specific belief that the statement as has been written here around Horizon being robust as it's written.
At all events, was it your understanding that before the past roles project there had been no internal reflection within the Post Office as to potential employee misconduct?
Reflection by the organisation
Yes.
on this. There hadn't been, as far as I was aware, certainly before I joined in 2019, any specific piece of work that had looked into what I think you're suggesting in terms of whether people were aware and what was of what happened in the past. No.
I mean, responsive to, for example, the findings of the judge in the Horizon Issues judgment.
not in terms of a specific piece of work about who was left within the organisation. I think this is the genesis of that work and of those thoughts, shall I say?
Well, the genesis you've explained, or the paper has explained that it was the compensation hearing in December 2022. I'm talking about things that might have been done following the Horizon Issues judgment of December 19.
Yes, we did. There was no specific piece of work looking into either individuals who left the organisation or indeed specifically people who were in the organisation at that stage.
Was that part of a culture that you maybe hinted at when you were being appointed or describing your appointment, that the organisation should not look too deeply into the past?
Possibly. I think it's more likely that the organisation was conscious that this inquiry would look very, very explicitly into activities of the past and very explicitly into issues that had occurred historically in a forensic and thorough manner, and that we would be, obviously, allegations and evidence would be presented that we, as I said yesterday, would commit to investigate as a consequence of what emerged. So rather than running two pieces of work in parallel, I think the view was very much that explicitly we would see evidence emerging from the inquiry, and then clearly that would be the trigger to take action if necessary in terms of further investigation, which is indeed what we do.
Can I turn to a separate thread of correspondence concerning the work on past roles involving the Horizon Advisory Board by looking at Bayes 40846. This is a separate thread of correspondence concerning the Past Roles project disclosed to us by Bayes involving the Horizon Advisory Board members and Mr. Recalding. Can we look at the top of page 5 and the bottom of page 4, please? Thank you. You can see there an email from Professor Christopher Hodges to Mr. Recaldin and others of June the 18th this year. You're not on the copy list. Professor Hodges, says, "Morning, Simon. Hope you're well. We held a Horizon Compensation Advisory Board meeting yesterday, at least semi-informally. No minutes will be published until a new government is in place. It's interesting there are so many issues continuing to require attention. We noted your letter." I'm not going to go to the letter that triggered this. "Thank you for your kind offer to brief us further." It's essentially a letter about the Past Roles project. Yes. "We didn't feel it necessary yesterday, not least in the light of the electoral purdah, but we'd be grateful for a further update. We note your ongoing review. The view was expressed that one might expect the answer in relation to individuals about previous involvement and hence ongoing involvement on sub-postmaster and mistress matters to be either yes or no. So we're intrigued to know more about the substance of the review and its timing." And then if we scroll up to page 3, please. Professor Hodges continues, "We have two concerns. One is about supporting trust of the victims in the compensation arrangements and anything else relevant. But the other is about timing, given the extensive ongoing bad publicity emanating from the inquiry at the same time as the ongoing and imminent new compensation arrangements. Anything you can deliver on the reassurance issue around the involvement of individuals, but also swiftly, would be useful." Were these concerns of the Horizon Advisory Board, Compensation Advisory Board, raised with you?
I will have spoken to Simon about these issues, yes.
And were they discussed with the board, in the context of, at about the same time, concerns being raised by the sub-postmaster, Neds, about the involvement of some individuals in the provision of redress and similar activities?
As we discussed yesterday, this has been a topic of conversation at the SEG and at the board for some time. This is certainly over the summer. This was and continues to be a topic of the board and of the SEG.
So the advisory board's interest in and comments on the Past Roles project were fed back to the board, is that right?
I believe they will have been, yes. I mean, this information, I think this is June, so I'm sure at the July board meeting this would have been fed back.
And similarly, is it right that government was taking an interest in the Past Roles project?
Yes.
Can we look, please, at Bayes 40848? And go to page 3, please. And if we scroll down, you'll see the Professor Hodges' email to Mr. Rakaldin. And then if we scroll up, you can see that Mr. Creswell shares that with a group of people within DBT, yes?
Yes.
And then scroll up, please, to page 2. In answer to the question, do we have a line on this? Answer in the department, not that I can remember. Suggestion, the department has made it clear to the Post Office in the past that it needs to take steps to remove those with involvement in the scandal in any work dealing with redress or appeals. It'd be wrong to prejudge any individuals before the inquiry has completed its work, but we would expect the Post Office to take action against anyone found to have played any role in the scandal. And then scroll up, please. Some tweaks are made. I've read the tweaks in already. The question raised, as this is an HR type process, would it be appropriate for government to comment until Post Office has done the work? And then keep scrolling, please. Some more discussion about lines for government. And then if we keep scrolling to the top of the page, please. Miss Brooks White says in her second sentence, I assume it came up in monthly discussions between NR, which I think is you, and Mr. Hollingrig. Is that right? Did this issue come up between in discussions between you and Mr. Hollingrig?
Yes, my recollection is it did come up in discussions with Minister Hollingrig.
And were the concerns raised by the sub-postmaster Neds passed on by you to Kevin Hollingrig?
I don't recall specifically. The conversations that Minister Hollingrig wanted was reassurance that we were doing work to ensure that there was no danger of confidence from victims of the scandal or indeed postmasters engaged in compensation. That was the focus of the conversation.
Does it give you concern or lingering doubts about the effectiveness of the Past Roles project and Project Phoenix, that neither of them are completed?
It's certainly been very frustrating for me that this process has taken as long as it has. I've not hidden from that frustration for the teams. I do recognise it is an extremely complex area, but notwithstanding that, finding suitable solutions has taken too long.
This is just so that I can be clear, I've got the timescale right. The genesis for the work was the December 2022
You're correct, sir.
compensation hearing, and the evidence over the last few days is that it will be resolved imminently. So we're talking about nearly 2 years.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Did you get a steer from government as to how to approach this issue?
I think my reflection on this is that Simon Recaldin had conversations with the government team on the ability to offer voluntary redundancy and redundancy payments to try and move people from the remediation unit. Those are still ongoing, as I understand it.
Can we look, please, at a record of one of the meetings held between you and the Minister, Kevin Hollinrake, MP, Bays 40739. And if we just go to the foot of the page, I think it's the second page actually. We can see this is an email, I think, sent to self essentially by Mr. Hollinrake's Deputy Head of Office and Private Secretary, Mr. Lucas. This is our record. If we go up, please, to the top. Of a meeting with you on the 23rd of January 2024, and the record was made on the 23rd of January 2024. Now, presumably you won't have seen this. This is a departmental record made in the way that we've seen by somebody sending an email to themselves, or a corporate account being used to do so. And if we just look down the left-hand side, we can see some initials. NR, obviously, you. Is that right?
That's correct.
KH, Kevin Hollinrake.
Yes.
CFO, can you see that?
Yes.
Is that a person, or the a person's initials, or is it the Chief Finance Officer?
I think it'll be Catherine Sherritt, the interim Chief Financial Officer.
Okay. So they've been referred to by their job title rather than their initials.
It would seem so.
LG, if we just scroll down a bit, you can see some LGs towards the bottom of the page. Is that Lorna Grattan?
Yes, that would be Lorna.
And so she, I think, was at this time a senior civil servant in UKGI and on the Post Office Board as the shareholder NED.
That's correct, and she still is, yes.
Yes. And SR, we see a bit of him coming into the discussion. Can you see there? Simon Recaldin, presumably.
That's correct.
And some CCs there as well. Carl Cresswell.
That's correct.
And we know the function that he performed. And if we just go up, please, to the top. There's some discussion about the Select Committee appearance and what Post Office will respond to the committee. Mr. Hollinrake said, "Get it is your job to look forwards. Your job clearly is not. It is simply not my position to opine and pass judgment on predecessors." He says the things you could have pointed out, but I take your point. You say, I don't want to go out there celebrating what we've done in the past 4 years, doesn't feel right. Don't want to pontificate from the pulpit on what we've done. Mr. Hollinrake, the key thing we've got to do is legislate for the convictions, not straightforward for various different reasons. One commitment I've made to various colleagues is where the money went. in context, is that a reference to the issue of where money paid by sub-postmasters
That's correct.
in purported satisfaction of a shortfall ended up
I think that's correct.
in post office accounts?
Indeed.
Okay. Ms. Sherratt replies, KPMG had a look. That info has been passed to the inquiry. Some other analysis has been done as well. Need to work through how the differences arose in the first place. Do we wish to refine our review internally? Do we want external support to pick up where the prior review left off? Irrespective, we need to be comfortable with the current process, with this type of difference, with the current system. I get the urgency. And then she continued, PwC are our current auditors. KPMG were brought in for that particular review. Mr. Hollingreek wants to get something in the public domain within a month. You were recorded as, and Ms. Sherratt to say we've got to. You say we've got 8 days before the end of the inquiry. I'm just reading this incidentally as by way of context for the meeting rather than just going into a bit of it.
Sure.
8 days before the end of the inquiry, we will have to have a position before phase 5. Is that you saying that we, the Post Office, will have to have a position on where the money went before the beginning of phase 5?
I think it certainly reads that way, yes.
And was that your view?
I think I was frustrated, as many people are and have been, at the inability to answer this question in a way that was in a way that was accurate. This particular challenge had been out there for some time. The sort of where did the money go question, as it was described in many of the media outlets. And I think we had employed, I think, 2 or 3 external forensic accountants over the years, certainly prior to my time, to try and get under the skin of this. It seemed peculiar to me that we were unable to get a fix, even with caveats around its level of accuracy, so that we could at least in part give people some confidence that we understood the size and scale of this issue, or got to the bottom of it.
Lorna Grattan says probably need to understand the order of magnitude. And you are recorded as saying clearly the business employed Wilmington, I think that's Ron Warmington, and Second Sight to do some work on this previously, maybe some merit in speaking to them. And then Mr. Hollingreek recorded as saying a real opportunity to draw a line under this more quickly. We've been asking for things from other parts of government for some time. Anything we can do to accelerate payments we would like to do. Do still hear from AB, maybe...
Advisory board?
Advisory board, yeah. That lawyers are arguing about a few hundred, that's probably quid, here and there. I do not want lawyers on either side slowing it down. We're under pressure to bring it back into DBT. We want you to deliver on them, give the benefit of the doubt to postmasters. There's more discussion on the HSS and the introduction of service level agreements, the use of without prejudice in correspondence. Mr. Hollingreek says that he thinks it was a big mistake to keep Herbert Smith Freehills involved in the scheme. Mr. Ricaldin says we're proactively phasing them out. And then if we go over the page, please. You are recorded in the third line as saying Robert Daly today, and he indeed was a witness on that day, a post office investigator. Biggest question for me is, do we need some autonomy in dealing with people rather than us coming back to you or the Treasury? We need a war chest, effectively. Can you help us as to what you were describing there?
Yes, we needed some financial support and guidance in terms of the ability to move individuals on from the organisation who were involved in the scandal. And we wanted to do that as quickly and as efficiently as possible. That might be through redundancy, that might be through a settlement, that might be through some other substantive reason to move people on, rather than going into potentially issues where we might sort of fall foul of the unions or the like. And so I think the point I was trying to make was that we wanted to move more quickly without having to refer back to the government for funding to do such a thing.
Lorna Grattan is recorded as saying, for those who appear publicly, you might have bringing the business into disrepute defence, but not those who don't appear publicly. You're recorded as saying there's reputational damage that could be done here. We want to be able to signpost this to stakeholders that we won't sit on the fence on these issues. Mr. Hollingrake says, I'm not a big fan of paying people off. Ideally, we go through a process. What we're grappling with is create a bit of distance from the people who are implicated somehow and those who are still in the business, and that is tainting it. And then Mr. Hollingrake says, I don't mind if we end up in an employment tribunal. Was that him signalling the approach to be taken here, that the Post Office should take robust action, even if it meant ending up on the wrong end of an employment tribunal claim brought by a dismissed employee?
Does sound like it.
Was that the approach taken?
No. I don't think we've been as robust as that.
Was this not the government giving you the green light to be robust?
Yes, I think it is. And as I mentioned before, I think we've dragged our feet in terms of being very, very specific about this.
I mean, the issue is the potential for individuals who still may be operating at the heart of Post Office who were implicated in events in the past, isn't it?
That is the case. And as I've been very clear, where we get formal allegations, we will act. Preemptively, we have struggled to move people on from the organisation.
Thank you. So I'm about to move to a separate subtopic. Could we break for 15 minutes until 20 to 12, please? Thank you, sir. Mr. Reid, I suspect with your familiarity with the issues in the inquiry and the time that you've spent preparing to give evidence in this phase, you will know that one of the issues explored by the inquiry is the facility for the Post Office and or Fujitsu to have remote access to branch accounts.
Correct.
And as a sub-issue, an exploration of what the Post Office has said across time about its and Fujitsu's facility to have access to branch accounts. Yes?
Yes.
And a third area of exploration is, or has been, who knew what about remote access and when.
Yes.
And no doubt you either heard, read, or were briefed about the evidence of Miss Vanden Bogaard, Angela Vanden Bogaard, concerning her knowledge of remote access and what she has said across time about the facility for remote access to branch accounts.
Yes.
Can we look, please, at poll 2029 4728. Poll 2029 4728. This is an email from a long time ago, before you were in post, predated your appointment by more than 8 years. And it's an email from Tracy Marshall, do you see?
I can, yes.
To Kevin Gilliland and Angela Vanden Bogard about Horizon system issues. It's the 5th of January 2011. And if you just look at the foot of the page, in fact, I think it's on the second page, you'll see that it's signed off by Tracy Marshall, Agent Development Manager within Network and Sales. And if we just go to the top, please. She says that she's made some progress on the outstanding questions. And then the second of those is the Post Office or Fujitsu having remote access to individual Horizon systems. And she says Post Office cannot remotely access systems and make changes to specific stock units. Fujitsu can remotely access systems. They do this on numerous occasions on a network-wide basis in order to remedy glitches in the system created as a result of new software upgrades. Technically, Fujitsu could access an individual branch remotely and move money around. However, this has never happened yet. The authority process is required. Audit process is robust enough to prevent this activity from being undertaken fraudulently. Concluding, so although changes can be made remotely, they'll be spotted and the person making the change will be identified. If we look, please, at poll 308-8956. We can see an even earlier email, which email has secured some significance in the inquiry. An email from Mr. Breeden to Miss Vanden Bogard, dated December 2010, and you can see that Miss Marshall was a copyee.
Yes, that's correct.
And if we just scroll down, and a bit more, please, and a bit more, a little bit more, and a little bit more, thank you. We see cut into this email chain an email sent previously by Lynn Hobbs, in which it was said that she had, quote, I had found out this week that Fujitsu can actually put an entry into a Brandt account remotely. It came up when we were exploring solutions around a problem generated by the system following migration. This was quickly identified and a fix put in place. It impacted around 60 branches and meant a loss or gain incurred in a particular week disappeared from the system. One solution, quickly discounted because of the implications around integrity, was for Fujitsu to remotely enter a value into a branch account to reintroduce the missing loss and gain. So Post Office can't do this, but Fujitsu can. One of the issues we've been exploring is the consistency of the accounts, or accuracy or reliability or truthfulness of the accounts that Ms. Vanden Bogard has given in the light of the fact she was provided with this information. As it seems was Tracy Marshall. And we've seen what she said in the first email that I have shown you, which on one view doesn't really reflect what is set out here. You tell us in your witness statement that a person, this is paragraph 238 of your third witness statement, that a person called Tracy Marshall as the Postmaster Engagement Director was the person who briefed you about the investigation of Elliot Jacobs.
Yes, I did, yes.
The email can come down, thank you. Is that the same Tracy Marshall that is engaged in these investigations and discussions about remote access?
Yes, it is.
And what position does she hold? Is it Network Development Director?
That's correct.
And can we look, please, at WITN 1161 0100? WITN 1161 0100. This is Ms. Marshall's witness statement of the 22nd of August, and it's a corporate witness statement. It's on behalf of the Post Office. And if we scroll down, she says that she is the, in fact, Retail Engagement Director.
Yes.
Her areas of responsibility cover postmaster onboarding, training, contract teams. And then if we scroll on, please. She says that she is responding to 2 Rule 9 requests addressed to the Post Office. And if we scroll down and keep going. Keep going, we can just scan this. And then definitions. And keep going. And keep going. So just going up, you can see the first question that she addresses. Current sub-postmaster contract, set out in details, changes made. And then, if we scroll on, please. Keep going. It's quite a long witness statement. I just want you to see the coverage of it.
Right.
And if we keep going, please. We asked to identify relevant changes made in the light of Mr. Justice Fraser's common issues judgment, essentially. And then if we keep going. The process by which sub-postmasters were notified of relevant changes, section 2, and scroll on, please. Process by which new sub-postmasters are notified of the terms and conditions. And scroll on, please. Terms of the contract and then negotiation, whether that's permissible and what's the process. And scroll on, please. If you just scroll to get the full heading of this section of the witness statement. Induction and ongoing support for postmasters and assistants, i.e. please provide details of the training now given to sub-postmasters, etc. And if we scroll on, please. I think this is quite a long section, so we can scroll quite fast. Details of any key guidance, policies, training or instructions given to those responsible for delivering training, and then carry on scrolling, please. Which department holds responsibility for such policies and guidelines, and then 8, details of the experience, expertise and qualifications of those responsible for delivering training. I'm not showing you or asking you to look at the responses to these, just showing you the coverage. 10, any key reports, reviews or investigations which address quality of training provided. And then scroll on, please. Details of any feedback, thought or engagement undertaken in relation to their training on the use and operation of Horizon. And scroll on, please. To what extent are sub-postmasters expected to train their own managers and assistants? And 13, any provision within Post Office for postmasters, managers or assistants to raise issues about the provision or efficacy of training? And then scroll on. Contractual liability for shortfalls, key policies and guidance relating to the liability of postmasters under the contract and other end users for shortfalls. And scroll on, please. Which department holds responsibility for such policies? Then a new section. All avenues available to sub-postmasters to raise queries or questions about Horizon and about the Business Support Centre. And the scroll on, please. Current process sub-postmaster goes through when they raise a balancing issue and seek assistance to resolve it. Policies, guidance, training or instruction for those operating the centre since the findings of Mr. Justice Fraser. And if we continue. Which departments hold responsibility for those policies? And 18, details of the experience, etc., of those responsible for operating the helpline. How the advice provided by the helpline is monitored, reviewed or checked. And then carry on, please. How calls raised with the helpline are monitored, reviewed or checked to identify issues or potential issues in branches in relation to particularly shortfalls, bugs, errors and defects. And then carry on. To what extent are branches proactively notified of bugs, errors and defects? And carry on, please. Sources of advice or assistance made available to sub-postmasters, managers and assistants. Any reports, reviews or investigations which address the quality of the advice and assistance provided via the helpline. The means by which a sub-postmaster, etc., can provide feedback on their experiences of using the helpline. Measures in place to ensure that postmasters, etc., who contact Post Office for assistance receive useful tailored advice. A section on suspension, reinstatement and termination. And then continue. And continue. And continue. And continue. That's it, keep going. Thank you. And keep going. Thank you. Just stopping there. Ms. Marshall is providing the inquiry with information. The retention of sub-postmasters, retention of post office employees, including in relation to their potential association of past wrongdoing. She's essentially the post office witness that's speaking to that issue. She is a person who, on one view, is involved or implicated in the remote access issue, and yet she's a corporate witness for the post office. Do you see a problem?
The issue emerged in the summer, which was the first time, I think, the last time the inquiry was sitting, and these emails emerged. We invited Tracy to step back from her day-to-day role while we tried to understand the significance of and the extent of any involvement that she had. She was very clear that she was unaware of remote access being actioned. She said she was aware that remote access was possible, but not whether or not it was enacted in any way. There were, I think, a couple of emails that we've just been through, and her line manager suggested to her that she take a step back from postmaster-facing activity so that confidence could be retained, and indeed provide the opportunity for us to examine any further whether or not there was something substantive with which she had to respond to.
She hasn't really taken a step back, though. She's taken a step forwards, hasn't she? Because she's provided a corporate witness statement to us and is giving evidence, I think, next week.
I think, well, my point at this stage was that there is no concrete evidence of any wrongdoing, and as a consequence of that, we want to obviously treat her in exactly the same way as we would anybody else, which is explore any allegations that have been made. But in reality, she is the individual who is best placed to write that corporate witness statement, and that is exactly what she's done. But at the same time, we're clear that for the confidence of postmasters, both past and present, it's inappropriate for her to be involved in activity that is postmaster-facing while the inquiry is still ongoing, and while we can and will explore whether there is anything that she needs to answer to.
Is there anything more postmaster-facing than giving evidence in the inquiry on behalf of the Post Office as a corporate witness?
I'm not sure I quite understand what you're getting at.
You said that you invited her to take a step back from
Yes.
postmaster-facing activity.
Correct.
Is it not postmaster-facing activity to come along and sit in the seat that you're sitting in, give evidence on behalf of the Post Office in relation to a whole range of issues that I've just quite slowly taken you through?
Yes, I can see the point you're trying to make. I think the point I'm trying to make is that my desire was that she wasn't involved in activity that was specifically postmaster facing, so running of forums, listening groups, engagement with postmasters, as opposed to, and by definition, therefore, the day-to-day running of her role. However, she had spent the previous 4 years in that role and had created a lot of the change that has been initiated by the Post Office, and therefore she is best placed to speak to it, and clearly the inquiry will speak to her, given that that is her role. I don't think it is inconsistent to remove her from coming to the inquiry to give evidence on the work that she's done. And, you know, if you have questions about other elements of her role going back over time, I'm sure the inquiry will explore that. As I said earlier, we have been very clear that where allegations are made, we will investigate those, and we will do that. But it is a presumption of innocence in the same way as it would be now for a postmaster as well. And I think it's important that we continue to maintain that. I certainly have a responsibility to all my colleagues as well as to postmasters, and I think it's appropriate that the balance, and it's a fine balance that we have adopted in terms of asking her to step back from day-to-day activity, maintaining the fact that she has done and has spent the last 4 years involved in activity which will be explored by this inquiry, and then giving her the chance to come and speak to that as well, which I think is a sensible way to progress. And we've been very clear that where people have been invited to step back at the conclusion of the inquiry, and when other allegations, if they are made, we will continue to act.
Thank you. Can I turn to, again, a sub-issue what we addressed briefly yesterday, namely having sub-postmasters as NEDs on the board.
Yes.
And you address this with a sort of qualitative assessment in paragraph 83 of your third witness statement.
Right.
If we can turn that up and have a look at it. So WITN 00760300. Thank you. Page 46. And it's paragraph 83. Thank you. You say, in respect of the board, postmaster non-executive directors have been an important part of trying to invert this dynamic. They bring a detailed and relevant understanding of current day matters to the board meetings in a uniquely credible way. This ensures a transparency of issues and an agreed and collective understanding across the organisation of the most important priorities. And then you go on to consider something slightly separate.
Yep.
You give the impression, would you agree, that having the postmaster NEDs on the board has been a positive thing?
I think it's been very positive, and I've been very consistent with that. I think it's an important part of the change that we've been trying to bring about at the Post Office. I was the champion of bringing Postmaster NEDs onto the board. It is and was a feature of the role that I had at NISA, where I had a combination of independent non-executive directors and member non-executive directors, and that mix worked well.
Can we look, please, at Bayes 40753? This is a readout of a meeting between you and other members of the Post Office executive. So Miss Sherratt, Mr. McKinn, and on the other side, Lorna Grattan, Carl Cresswell, Jamie Lucas. It's a similar, and I should say Mr. Hollingray too.
Yes.
We can say see his private secretary is also recorded as being present. And I just want to, again, read a little bit of context. You say, pleased with our session. Is that referring to the session before the Select Committee? Just look at the date at the top.
Yes, I think there were two Select Committee meetings, one in January and one in February. And I think this one is referring to the
second.
February one,
Yeah.
yes.
You say you were pleased with your session and felt a bit like the rug got pulled from beneath us. Mr. Hollingrake is reported as saying it's fair to say at a certain point in time have to take the gloves off and try to manage the information. I think the Select Committee were weak with him, apart from Anthony Higginbottom. Sorry it was so messy, keen to support in any way we can to make sure we get past this. Hope he's discredited. Is that a reference to Henry Staunton?
That's correct, yes.
So the Minister was saying that he hoped that Henry Staunton was discredited?
That's correct, yes.
Anything else you need, anything else you think we need to make it easier? You say you're looking to Lorna Grattan, need as much support as you can get from Ben Tidswell to try and get the board functioning properly. We need to try and find a way through the Project Pineapple memo. That's the inadvertently disclosed email.
That's correct, yes.
And you're recorded as saying, we'll have a board meeting tomorrow and see where we can get to. The postmaster, Neds, may use tomorrow as an opportunity to criticise on funding and anti-postmaster sentiment. Need to avoid tomorrow morning being a proper road crash. Miss Sherratt had a bit of a flavour of it on Monday. They think it did not do enough for postmasters. Elliot mentions where the investment for the future of the business and postmaster REM is front and centre, costs are rising. This has been a theme of theirs for a while. And then you're recorded as saying this goes back to whether the postmaster directors are playing a role of a director or a trade union rep. I don't know where that's going to go. They're extremely exposed as a result of Project Pineapple. Not sure how to patch this up in a slight standoff. And then Miss Grattan, they're not in a good place, aren't operating in in a way appropriate for the business. You ask, how can they ensure their own self-interest doesn't cut across their role in supporting Post Office as a business? This doesn't seem to record such a rosy picture of yours of the sub-postmaster Neds.
I think it's a moment in time, and I think we've heard a lot about Project Pineapple in this environment. What I would say is the point of the postmaster directors on the board is to be challenging, is to bring a tactical view of what is going on the ground. And I went into this with my eyes open, fully knowledgeable that this would be uncomfortable. The big challenge for the postmaster Neds, of course, is that they are elected to the board, unlike anybody else who is appointed to the board. So as an elected representative on the board, voted for by other postmasters, they've got a very dual challenge of, on the one hand, feeling that they are representing postmasters, whilst at the same time recognising they have duties as directors of Post Office. And that provides conflict. Not unsurprisingly, and you heard from both Saf and Ismail a couple of weeks ago, I think Saf suggested he was working anything up to 10 days a month on this. Not unsurprisingly, many postmasters were looking to them and constantly looking to them to say, what have you done? What have you done? What are you doing? And I think that is the challenge that we've had, and Saf and Elliot have faced. Considerable pressure from their peer group, whilst at the same time having to recognise that they've got to, and they have duties as directors of the Post Office. And so it is a tricky play. There's no question that this time, and you'll be very familiar with this, that this time was a very difficult period for the Post Office. The departure of Henry, the exposure of the Project Pineapple email, the challenges that the that the postmaster non-executive directors felt, but also they were coming to the end of their term at this stage, the 3 years, and I think they felt very keenly that they wanted to be able to demonstrate they'd made a real difference. And I think that has, I do believe that is to be the case, but I think it was something that was playing on their minds as well.
When did you start becoming concerned that they may not be acting as directors, but instead as trade union reps?
I mean, I don't think we should make too much of this. I don't think that is a major issue. I think one of the challenges that this role has, it's exactly what I experienced at NISA, was trying to get that balance between representing postmasters, as I've mentioned, and actually fulfilling a role as a director. It's an ongoing issue and an ongoing challenge, and very difficult, in fact, virtually impossible, to draw a line between the two. And I think it requires very sensitive navigation from them, very sensitive navigation from other board members, and indeed, obviously, from me, in terms of making sure that we get the best from the postmaster non-executive directors.
What did you understand to mean by trying to find a way through the Project Pineapple memo?
My understanding of that, and what was on my mind at the time, was we just lost our chairman in very difficult circumstances. I think everybody was acutely conscious of the manner of Henry's departure and the publicity that was associated with that. We had two non-executive directors who were concerned about the exposure of the Project Pineapple email.
Well, I think before that they were concerned about the conduct of 3 members of the General Executive.
They were.
I mean, that was the substance of their concern.
That was the substance.
The inadvertent disclosure of the email, as you described it, is an additional matter.
It is an additional matter, but I think the primary matter that is being discussed in this email is, and was from my perspective, how do we bring some stability and cohesion to the board, given we'd lost the chairman and we had 2 main board directors who were disenfranchised. Less about what they were disenfranchised with and more about the personal circumstances they were in, was my interpretation of what was going on. And what I wanted to try and create was an environment where we got a sense of collegiality and a sense of stability at a board level. It was quite apparent that this was causing a disquiet amongst the organisation. It was being played out in public, and it was, as I think I mentioned before, pretty unedifying and unhelpful for the direction of the business.
At this time, the Post Office was pushing out a public message that it was putting sub-postmasters at the heart of its business, including by having sub-postmaster Neds on the board, wasn't it?
I don't think it was necessarily at this particular moment doing that. I think postmasters had been on the board for almost 3 years prior to this particular sort of situation. So I'm not sure that's necessarily a fair characterisation.
To what extent were the board, including the non-executive directors, updated on the contact that you and other members of the executive were having with the shareholder?
I report back on the detail of the shareholder meeting, and when there are specific issues that emerge, I invariably take my corporate affairs director with me to these meetings on a monthly basis, and notes of those meetings are then shared with either the chairman or indeed with the entire board, depending on the content that is required. So that would happen after each of the ministerial meetings, and of course I would refer to the ministerial meetings in my CEO reports to the board, of which many have been displayed.
You'll remember that one of Grant Thornton's criticisms was the extent to which the shareholders' input was driving decision-making and performance at Post Office.
Yes.
And so to what extent were the board, including the non-executive directors, cited on exchanges such as this?
On the sort of mechanics of what is going on in here, probably less about the mechanics. If there are things and matters of substance, and of course those are issues that we would share with the board.
did you share the view that Miss Grattan expressed that the sub-postmaster Neds were not operating in a way appropriate for the business?
Did I share that with...
Did you share that view?
Oh, did I share that
Yes,
view?
did you hold that view?
No, I think my experience of the postmaster Neds is that they are naturally challenging of me, and I'm open to that challenge.
Mr. Ismail has given evidence to us, that can come down, thank you, that he believed after the departure of Mr. Staunton that responsibility to heal the rifts in the board after Project Pineapple was placed upon the two sub-postmaster executives. Is that correct?
I don't think explicitly that was necessarily the case. I think clearly as main board directors, they have an opportunity to engage with members of the group executive, and by definition, I think they share some responsibility to try and move that agenda forward. I don't think it's necessary that the chairman has to do it or the SID has to do it. I think everybody has a responsibility to try and ensure that we get a sense of stability and cohesion back onto the board. So I don't think it was any one person's responsibility.
Did you leave it to them, the two sub-postmaster Neds, to build bridges with Mr. Fote and Mr. Richards?
On reflection, I probably did give them too much of the onus was placed upon them. I think that's probably a fair reflection. I think at this time, not unsurprisingly, we were under enormous amounts of pressure as an organisation, and my reflection is that I probably could have done more.
It was your actions that in particular had left them exposed to a response or reprisals from those against whom they made allegations, wasn't it?
Well, as we discussed yesterday, it was an inadvertent mistake, and we've been through the mechanics of how that mistake occurred. I also expressed my apology to them within 12 hours of the event occurring. So I don't think it's fair to characterise it in that way. I think it was as I say, an inadvertent mistake. It was disappointing that it had occurred. I was keen to make sure that we moved on, and it obviously didn't. We obviously didn't move on as quickly as would have been helpful. But notwithstanding that, I think that the scenario surrounding Henry's departure clearly didn't help.
Thank you. Can we move to a new topic, which is...
Before we do, Mr. Beard,
yes,
just to clear my mind, and I think you were present when Ms. Carabalotti gave evidence, yeah?
I was, sir.
And in relation to postmaster non-executive directors, she was asked some questions about that.
Yes.
And I'm not pretending that these were her words, all right, but she seemed to be suggesting, I think, that they had a very important, that current serving postmasters had a very important role to play, but perhaps not as members of the board. Do you remember her giving that?
Yes.
I just wondered what your view of that was, if you have one.
Yes, I do, Sir Win. I do believe that they have a role to play on the board. I think we were in a situation with no other operators, retailers on the board other than effectively myself and the two non-executive directors, and I think it gave reassurance to other board members that they had a tactical understanding of what is going on the ground in that forum, and that they would challenge me in particular on issues that we were implementing. So I think it was a really important part of the development that we've had over the last 3 years to have the postmaster non-executive directors being in a position where they could challenge the change that was being implemented into our business.
All right, thank you. Sorry, Mr.
in fact, on that topic, we could go back and look at Bayes 40753. This was the note of the meeting you held with Mr. Hollingrig and others on the 29th of February. And if we just scroll down, and a bit more, please. Yes, just stop there. I left off examining the memo with Lorna Grattan saying they're not in a good place and aren't operating in a way appropriate for the business. And you said, how can they ensure their own self-interest doesn't cut across their role in supporting Post Office as a business? And then if we scroll on, please. And a little further. Yes, sort of 6 paragraphs from the bottom. There's 8 paragraphs from the bottom. Lorna Grattan says, I don't think postmaster oversight of the board is worth it. I think there's good mileage for more postmaster input in the retail side of the business. Did you understand it to be her view that having postmasters on the board was not worth it, but there was more value in having them have some other input, as it's called, in retail?
Not quite. I think what was being described here is the voice of the postmaster and the NFSP, as I recall, were progressing a concept of an oversight board that sat above the main board of the Post Office and played a strategic role in shaping the direction of travel. So I think that is what the oversight of the board, which would be populated by people from the CWU, ministerial colleagues, potentially postmasters as well. So I think that is what is being described here by way of postmaster oversight of the board. From a retail perspective, I think what Lorna is referring to here is there a more, I wouldn't say executive role, but I think is there a role of oversight within the retail business of the Post Office that the postmaster non-execs can play, which I think is quite a complicated concept. You heard Mr. Ishmael say he did 10 days a month anyway. I was trying to wrestle in my own mind what a postmaster non-executive director with more role in retail that then starts to blur, I think, the boundaries of what an executive does and what a non-executive does. So it is a difficult concept. I think what Lorna is quite rightly pointing out is certainly where the Post Office is now, there is an opportunity for more input from the broader postmaster community, and I buy that completely, and I do believe that, which is certainly why we have a serving postmaster as part of the senior leadership team. I think trying to fashion the role as described here could be complicated in terms of accountabilities.
So we shouldn't read this to mean that Ms. Grattan's view, as expressed here, was that having postmasters on the board was not worth it.
I don't, certainly, that's not how I read it, no.
Thank you. Can we, I only raise that because it's linked to the question that the chairman asked.
Right.
Can we move to the new topic then, which is the post-group litigation postmaster contract?
Yep.
We looked at the front page and a bit of it, section
Yes.
19 already. The cross-reference, no need to turn it up, is poll 400254. And I think the Post Office produced a guide, do you remember,
Yes.
for postmasters, a summary of the effect of the common issues judgment on the postmaster contracts. I'm not going to engage in an exercise of comparing what it said
Yep.
versus the judgment, but instead go straight to the contract itself, poll 400254. Another way of saying that is poll 500254. Thank you. Can we look, please, at page 32? And this is, would you agree, one of the key clauses? It's section 12.
Yep.
Responsibility for post office stock and cash. And if we scroll down, please, to 12. Losses, so section 12.12. The sub-postmaster is responsible for all losses caused through his own negligence, carelessness or error, and also for all losses caused by the negligence, carelessness or error of his or her assistants. Deficiencies due to such losses must be good without delay. I think you'll recognise that there's a change there from the past contract in that it introduces the qualifier negligence, carelessness or error in relation to assistants.
Yes, correct.
Rather than an absolute liability
Correct.
for losses caused by assistance. And then clause 13, subject to clauses 12 and 13a, the financial responsibility of the sub-postmaster does not cease when he relinquishes his appointment. He'll be required to make good any losses incurred during his term of office, which may subsequently come to light. And then some new clauses, 13a, Post Office shall not seek recovery from the sub-postmaster unless and until, one, it's complied with its duties under clause 20, or some of them, and we'll look at those in a moment. Two, it's established that the alleged shortfall represents a genuine loss to it. And three, it's carried out a reasonable and fair investigation as to the cause and reason for the alleged shortfall and whether it is properly attributed to the sub-postmaster under the terms of this contract. Gains, surpluses may be withdrawn provided that any subsequent charge-up to the amount withdrawn is made good immediately. And then if we go forward to 20, Post Office duties, Post Office shall, one, provide the Horizon system, which is defined, which shall be reasonably fit for purpose, including any or adequate error repellency. Two, provide adequate training and support, including through provision of training materials to the sub-postmaster, particularly if and when Post Office imposes new working practices or systems or requires the provision of new services. And then three, I'm going to ask some questions about this in a moment, properly and accurately effect, record, maintain, and keep records of all transactions effected using Horizon. Four, properly and accurately produce all relevant records and or explain all relevant transactions and or any alleged or apparent shortfalls attributed to the sub-postmaster. Five, cooperate in seeking to identify the possible or likely causes or of any apparent or alleged shortfalls and or whether or not there was indeed any shortfall at all. Six, identify the causes of any apparent or alleged shortfalls in any event. Seven, disclose possible causes of apparent or alleged shortfall and the cause thereof to the sub-postmaster candidly, fully and frankly. Eight, make reasonable inquiry, undertake reasonable analysis and even-handed investigation and give fair consideration to the facts and information available as to the possible causes of the appearance of alleged or apparent shortfalls. 9, I'm going to ask some questions about this too. Communicate, alternatively, not conceal known problems, bugs or errors in or generated by Horizon that might have financial and other resulting implications for the sub-postmaster. 10, communicate, alternatively not conceal, the extent to which other sub-postmasters of branches are experiencing problems relating to Horizon and the generation of discrepancies and alleged shortfalls. 11, not conceal from sub-postmasters, post offices' ability to alter remotely data or transactions upon which the calculation of the branch accounts depend. And 12, properly, fully and fairly investigate any alleged or apparent shortfalls. So with these additional obligations imposed on Post Office,
Yes.
how is the question of the negligence, carelessness or error by a sub-postmaster or their staff approached in practice?
In practice, in practice, we do a number of things. Certainly, from an investigative point of view, or from trying to work out whether a discrepancy or a loss has occurred, we have a completely different approach to that we adopted prior to 2019. We have, as I mentioned yesterday, we have created a number of different teams with different responsibilities. That starts with the network monitoring team, who identify and look for and monitor the network on a day-to-day basis to identify where there are different issues and different problems emerging, and indeed if they are doing so. Clearly we have the branch support team in terms of the assurance team who do the stock and reconciliation issues, and we have a support and reconciliation team as well that is also ring-fenced to help support postmasters. But I think the most important principle is that we start from a position of innocence, and it is our objective to help postmasters to understand how, if and when discrepancies have occurred, how do we work with them. And we have a tiered process for doing this. The branch support centre is clearly the first port of call for any postmaster who may or may not have an issue that might emerge. We have a second line team, which is the branch support and reconciliation team, which are there to aid and support postmasters with more complex issues. And clearly we have an IT team who do go out to branches very specifically to help postmasters identify and resolve issues that may or may not be well understood by those particular postmasters. So it's a very different approach to the one that we adopted pre-2019.
In terms of negligence, carelessness or error, for instance, if a sub-postmaster says that the loss arose because of a lack of training in undertaking this process, I admit I pressed these buttons and I admit that it caused a loss of £500, but that was because the process I was undertaking, I wasn't properly trained upon it, and that's what's caused the loss. Is that negligence, carelessness or error?
I haven't personally been in to do investigations of that nature, but I think the principle that is important at this stage is where there is a disagreement between a branch and the post office over a discrepancy or over an issue, we are not, other than going into a dispute resolution process and a further level of investigation and a degree of assurance process, we are not enforcing that loss on a postmaster. And I think that is an important principle at this stage. We don't think it's appropriate and we are not enforcing it. So it's possibly not answering the specifics of your question, but I think the principle that I'm trying to describe is that we start with a presumption of innocence, and we also start with the fact that if we cannot resolve an issue, we are not imposing a solution on a particular branch.
The evidence from one of the sub-postmaster NEDs was to the effect that the button on the Horizon keyboard on the branch terminal for paying in was proximate to the button for paying out.
Yes.
And it was therefore easy to press the wrong button. Is that something that would be classified as postmaster error and therefore something for which they were responsible, i.e. pressing the wrong button?
Again, I'm not sure I'm able to describe that specifically, but on the principal point that you make, we've obviously spent quite a lot of time looking at the keyboard itself, so that where there are specific issues, as you've just described, that are manual issues, we have tried to move buttons and change buttons to make sure that it is more intuitive and easier and less manual in terms of some of the mistakes that are being made.
Does the Post Office provide some sort of guidance, either to its investigators or to its sub-postmasters, as to what negligence, carelessness, or error means and what it looks like in practice?
I don't know whether that is specifically the case. We do have online and e-learning tools around the investigative process, around what we do and why we do it, and examples of where issues could and may emerge.
So sort of case
yes,
studies of
that's
what would and would not fit within this type of sub-postmaster liability.
That's my understanding, yes.
And the purpose of asking you those questions, those two examples that I gave, wasn't to get definitive answers for use in the future. Would you agree that it's necessary to have some sort of guidance so that sub-postmasters are clear beyond the three bare words themselves as to in what circumstances they will be liable for shortfalls and which they may not?
Yes, I think that's fair.
Paragraph 20.3 provides that the Post Office will, quote, properly and accurately effect, record, maintain and keep records of all transactions effected using Horizon. Does this mean that a mechanism exists for monitoring the identification of and payment of any shortfalls by sub-postmasters?
Yes, it does.
So is there a mechanism for recording the payment of shortfalls by sub-postmasters?
There is now, yes.
And when was that introduced?
Certainly post-2019, I've had discussions with Melanie Parks, who I think you're speaking to next week, and indeed around this very topic, which is there a record of all payments that are made by postmasters, and a reason code and a payment vehicle that describes what it is that they are paying for, whilst at the same time is there a problem impact database that describes all the bugs, errors and defects that have emerged, what we've done about them, whether they've been fixed, what potential detriment they may or may not have thrown up, and that is obviously a database with which the branch support teams and the stock and reconciliation teams who do support and reconciliation teams who do engage with postmasters obviously have access to, so that when postmasters describe issues that they may be experiencing, we now have a database of all the issues that have emerged, and that's certainly, I think it is since 2019, I could be wrong, and all the payments, and more importantly, the way that reconciliation has occurred in terms of resolving those issues.
Is that function run and maintained by Fujitsu?
No, that's run and maintained by Melanie Park's operation team in Chesterfield.
Paragraphs 4, 5 and 6, would you agree, taken together, require the Post Office to identify the reason for shortfalls? In particular, 6.
Yes, I mean, the onus, as I've stated, the onus is very much on the Post Office to identify where these problems have occurred, and the onus is very much on the Post Office to ensure that if there are any fixes that need to be made, that they make them. So yes, I would agree with that.
And that duty to identify the cause of a shortfall exists irrespective of whether the shortfall is settled by the sub-postmaster?
That's correct.
Thank you. So it's 1:45 now. Could I invite you to break until 1:45?
Yeah, certainly.
Thank you very much.